Okay, thanks for watching. This is going to be a quick video showing a little bit about the torque limits in a AEM VCU using AEMCal software. So one of the first things we're going to do is we can either open a file or connect directly to the VCU. I've got a VCU on a desktop, so I'm going to connect to it. And one thing you may need to do is use layout load tabs to open the layout that you want to pick. And on mine, I'm using this VCU 200 BMS 18. Near the end, this will say which build, and you'd like, ideally, that build from the layout should match the build that's in your VCU. So just for good measure, I'm going to open this layout. I had it close the old tabs. One of the first things you'll see in one of these layouts is this safety warning acknowledgement. If you have not clicked yes yet, if you're at no, it will not try to pre-charge any of the outputs, the inverter outputs. So that's one of the first things you want to do. I'm going to assume that this vehicle has already had the basic, we'll call it setup, already configured. So it already has the accelerator pedal configured so that it measures voltage correctly. It already has all the inputs set up so it's able to pre-charge and actually drive around. Now, I'm not connected to an actual vehicle on this one, but I'm just going to assume that for the sake of keeping this short, that you've already got that on your setup. So I want to look at, say they had a torque limit that they don't understand yet. They wanted more torque than they were seeing, like on the dash display. So I'm going to go through and we're going to read and talk about some of these torque limiters that are in the VCU software. I think it's easier to start with the generating derates. These are for like regen. And we have, I'm going to resize this a little bit. So we have a couple different ones. One of them is a motor torque limiter multiplier for battery state of charge high. And this one over here is the input breakpoints are state of charge. So this breakpoint should probably be set to something like 100% state of charge. And down here should be something like 95%, 90, 85, 80, 75, 70, something like that. So if your breakpoints don't already look like this, you can type them in the way I just did. And then these numbers here are multipliers. So 1.0 is no change to the torque limit. 0.5 would be 50% lower. 0.8 would be 20% lower, so 20% reduced. And you can do things here for regen, like say that you don't want to pump power into the battery when the state of charge is very high. So here's a couple ways you could do that. You could set some numbers in here. Maybe you want to go a little bit more aggressive, 0.2. So whatever the original regen calcs were without any changes, we're going to take 20% of those numbers, so 80% less than normal, because our battery state of charge is very high and we don't want to overcharge the battery by regenning when it's nearly fully charged. Now this is depending on the VCU's state of charge calculations or the state of charge that it's receiving from a BMS. There's another way we can do this kind of same effect, is we can look at the second table here. It's called motor torque limiter multiplier for cell volts max. And this one would, if we're getting individual cell voltages, we can decide that based on cell voltage, we might want to limit regen that way. In case you have one battery cell that's higher than the rest, we could limit regen to avoid overcharging that one cell. Again, these breakpoints are probably not appropriate for your vehicle's battery pack, but if we wanted to do something like 4.6 here and 4.4 and 4. Maybe 3 and 4.2, 4.1, 4, 3.9, something like that, you could go in here and obviously you can set whatever breakpoints you need, but you've got this many of them, and it is going to interpolate. So if you have a very aggressive limit here, 0.5 at 430, and 1.0, right, no change to regen at 420 max cell voltage, when it's between these two breakpoints, it's going to calculate between these two cells. So if our cell voltage was 4.25, it would be between, like, smack in the middle of these, and it would be half of this and half of that, so it would be about 0.75, which is about a 25% reduction in regen torque because of cell voltage. So that's another one that's probably useful to set up. You want to get these all set up ideally before you drive any of these vehicles, right? You want to set our safeties first and then go drive them and make sure everything's working. And really, for the first drive, I would set these to be quite aggressive, and I would even set them to be kicking in more often than you eventually intend them to. For instance, even if you know it's very safe to be regenning as low as 80% state of charge, I would put some numbers in here, and I would do that because you want to test it down here at 80% state of charge where the stakes are lower. I wouldn't have your first time you see this table work be at a very high state of charge where the stakes are high. That's just my opinion. But I like the idea of being pretty conservative and pretty safe about these sort of things. So generating torque, that's for regen. There's just a few of these. You can see over here the results of all these. Excuse me. So I don't have a great test bench set up here where it's doing regen torque and showing you the actual torque numbers, but torque request is the requested torque based on your tables, like the live cell in the table right now. Torque limit low is the torque limit for regen. Motor 1 torque lim low, this is a multiplier, so this would be the results of these tables. So if you were up at 85% state of charge, you would expect to see 0.8 for that number. And it's going to take the lower number of these two. It's not going to stack them. So if you had one of these at 0.5 and the other one at 0.7, it's going to take the 0.5 value. It's not going to multiply 0.5 times 0.7 and get you even lower than your lowest number in these tables. It's going to take just the minimum of these tables. This one down here is for motor torque limit multiplier for vehicle speed low table, and that's intended for regen braking when the vehicle's nearly stopped or at very low vehicle speeds. So you could set this to do, excuse me, again, you'd probably want to adjust these breakpoints to lower numbers, maybe 0 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour, something like that. And then you could set up some things that said, look, we don't want any regen at 0 mile an hour maybe, and then we want some at 5, but maybe not full regen at 5 miles an hour. Maybe we want only 70, for instance. And then between these two, the regen's gonna kind of ramp out on the way down to 0. So motoring torque derates, there's a few more tables here. These are all for driving, right, when we're powering the vehicle with the motor. And this will be a little easier to see when you've got an actual vehicle going. Then, you know, mine's got a kind of a bunch of zeros and a bunch of numbers that aren't really what you would see on a car. But these tables here, this one here is motor torque limit multiplier for battery state of charge low. So when your battery is at a low state of charge, 10% state of charge, you can have a multiplier in here that says, look, we don't want to pull a lot of power out of the pack when it's low state of charge, right? We want to conserve things, or at the very least, we want to let the driver know you shouldn't be getting on it hard because you don't have a lot of pack reserve left. If you don't like the idea of typing numbers into this, you could kind of select a few things and then right click and pick interpolate, and the software will smoothly do that. Now the software isn't necessarily aware of these breakpoints, so what it did is it interpolated just these 4 cells are, you know, smoothly interpolated. It's not aware that our breakpoints are uneven here, so something to be aware of there. There's another one here for motor torque limit multiplier for pack voltage. So sometimes this is a little bit easier to conceptualize, is, you know, at this pack voltage, I want this much of a torque reduction. And again, you can change these breakpoints. If your pack voltage isn't centered around this 325 to 330 number, you can set these to whatever. So usually you would have lower numbers here at lower pack voltages. So maybe we'll say that we'll give it 50% at these low voltages, and then we'll maybe interpolate up to no change up here. Be aware that this is going to take effect even if the pack sags because of normal current draw. So if your pack voltage is sitting at 350 and you stomp on the accelerator, the inverter draws 1,000 amps out of the motor, or 1,000 amps out of the pack, and your pack voltage sags down from 350 down to 325, it's going to use this cell while the pack voltage is 325. So be aware of that when you're setting these numbers, is it might sag into these ranges, and that's okay. If it's dangerous to pull too much power out of it when it's 325 volts, you want this to be taking an effect when that sag happens. Again, we got another one here for cell min volts. So if your low cell volts, if you had just one or two cells that are low, you still want, excuse me, if you had just one or two cells that are low, you may want to limit torque in that event, even if the rest of the pack voltage is high, and even if the rest of the state of charge is measuring high, you can do that. And again, just like the other ones, it's going to take the lowest value from any of these tables. So if your pack voltage was nice and high at 330 or above, and your state of charge was pretty high at indicating, you know, 30 or above, but you had one single cell that was below 3.0 or 2.9, it would take the numbers from these cells. And again, if there's multiple limits kicking in, it'll take the lowest of these limits. Now, another thing you can watch is, maybe you saw while I was making these changes that some of these kicked in as displaying active. Active just means that this limit is taking effect, right? So this one for cell volts min, we have a non-zero change, right? Our change is 30% less, and because it's using that cell that's changing the limit, that's considered active. So if I was to change this whole table back to 1, we would see it show back as not active. And if I was to change other cells that we're not using, right, those other cells are not affecting whether it's considered active. It's considered active based on the cell that it's referencing. So if I go back here and set this to 0.99, it'll tell us, hey, you are pulling 1%. This limiter is active. It's only taking 1% less torque, but it is active. It's not making no changes. And same thing for those other cells. Those cells, because our indicated pack voltage right now is low, down here it's showing pack voltage is 0, which is very, very low. It's using the bottom of these tables. Over here we've got similar derates or multipliers for, this is motor torque limit multiplier for pack temp high. So this uses the battery pack high temperature, whatever the highest it's getting, if it's our BMS, an AEM BMS, or if it's somebody else's BMS that's sending us a value for pack max temp. This is going to use that. So you can punch in these numbers. Mine's showing degrees Fahrenheit, but most customers' calibrations are going to be degrees C. I've got a version that's possibly a little bit newer. So if yours is showing degrees C, don't be surprised that that's different than what mine is showing. We've also got one for low pack temperatures. So if you are near 32 Fahrenheit freezing, you probably want to, draw less power out of the pack there. A couple other things here are for vehicle speed. This one you could use as like a speed limiter or rev limiter. So say you did not want your vehicle going very, very fast. If you thought that 150 miles an hour was unsafe, and maybe 140 miles an hour is unsafe, but 130 might be safe. On the safe racetrack environment that you're using this at, you could tell it, I want 0 torque output when the vehicle speed is 150, and then maybe interpolate that to half speed or 0.6 when the miles an hour is 140, and so it would use that if the vehicle speed is very high. You could use that as a sort of safety speed limiter there, or you set it to 1 and not have a speed limit from the motor. Down here we've got limits for inverter. I believe this is inverter temperature. Yeah, so the input here is inverter temperature, and mine's in degrees F, but most calibrations are probably going to show degrees C. That's actually in the version of AEMCal software. I've got a pre-production or pre-release software that lets you show limits. Sorry, man, I should not be the video guy. I've got a version that can display temperature in whatever units you prefer. So if you prefer to look at Fahrenheit units versus Celsius units, I've got mine set to Fahrenheit just to test that works. So if your inverter temperature was 77 degrees F, you can do things. Or if your inverter temperature was 130 degrees F, you can, that's usually where you do it, is if your inverter is getting too hot. We've got another table for motor temperature. This is motor temperature that usually gets reported by the inverter. So if your motor temperature is warm, you can take some torque out. Whatever you think is safe things to do. You can set that there. I guess I should put some numbers here for high inverter temp. And don't assume that my numbers are the right numbers here. If you're thinking to yourself, I wouldn't put 50% out, I would put 30% out, or 70% out, whatever. Punch in your numbers. Don't trust me. I'm not the motors expert or the inverters expert guy. I'm just the guy making this video showing you how this piece of our software works. So those are the torque derates. We already did those ones. This one called ramp limiter. The VCU can limit the motor speed by basically requesting less torque if it's above a certain motor speed. And it's a ramp type of limit. I would just leave that set there. This window means how soon it will start ramping torque out. And then you have a ramp rate of how quickly it can let the ramp happen, and then a ramp max of how much torque it's allowed to take out. So for instance, this 0.1 means it goes down to 10% of the original torque to keep this motor speed from exceeding our limit here. Another one that people will probably need to adjust the first few times they're running these vehicles is in the torque requests. And I think we put it in, there's one here that is motor torque limit. So this is just a very simple number that you can set here of Newton meters. So one of these is a positive number for driving, the other one's a negative number for regen. So if you thought that your regen was not strong enough, you could set it to maybe minus 60 Newton meters of regen or 70 Newton meters of regen. Now eventually there's going to be some number of Newton meters that the inverter is going to just quit obeying and not give you more regen. But if your inverter will take 70 Newton meters, you'd want to put this here so that it's not clamped elsewhere. Same thing here. You can ours was set to 450 in this map. This motor base table shows that the motor could be requesting 650. So we would need to change this number here up to 650 for our torque limit to do that. And let's see, so I'm seeing 240 as the torque limit high right now. And let's go and find where that's coming from, right? I believe that's over here in the performance level. There's a couple of other pages that can do that. So these here are torque limits in Newton meters based on motor speed, and there's 4 of these, one for each performance level. If you have our AEM keypad and it has that tortoise and the hare, the rabbit turtle looking button, you can use those to switch which performance level the VCU is running in. And it can use different, it can actually use, in some builds, different torque pedal maps. There's a pedal map for performance 1, another pedal map for performance 2, and 3, and 4, and you can set these to each different things. If you wanted to have, for instance, less max torque in level 4, you could do that here, and you can see that there still is a 3 table that's different, and a 2 table that's different, and a 1 table that's different. And so similar to those different torque maps, you've also got different torque limits. So these are like a clamp of if we set this low, it would prevent it from asking for more. And mine is showing that the torque limit right now is 240, and oh, that's because of our fractions. That's because of one of our limiters kicking in. And let's go find which of our limiters are active. Limit for pack voltage is active, and limit for battery state of charge is active. So for now, I'm going to set these to 1 because I don't want them to get in the way of the calculations. So our pack voltage table is set to 1, which means our pack voltage limiter is no longer active. Our battery state of charge limiter is still set to 0.4 at that cell. So I'm going to set it back to 1, and then it's no longer active. And now we can see that our torque limit high is now up to 600 Newton meters. And our limit multiplier is no longer 0.4 or whatever it was, it's now 1.0, no change. These are also showing not active. So if I go back to my torque request, I can see that this number, 600 Newton meters, is coming from this table here, right? Our limit is because of these numbers here. So I'm going to change these from 600 to something lower, and we can see that it moved. So if yours is set to a low value like 250, and you want more than 250, you would probably change it here. And also just watch here that the limit does change so that you're adjusting the correct table. So if we want our 620 Newton meters or 650 or whatever, we can punch that in here. That'll be the new limit. This is RPM motor speed based. So if you did want something like don't let the car do a burnout at 1000 motor speed or below, you could set this to something lower. Say you thought 300 Newton meters is enough for low RPM, and then give it more Newton meters at higher RPM. You could do that. You could give it 400 up here and 500 up here. So now as the motor speed goes up, the torque limit would also go up. Even ignoring, not so much ignoring, but clamping down the numbers from these tables. And you do have other ones for performance level 2 and performance level 3 and level 4. Another thing that's going to change how the vehicle feels is this one here, this motor torque request limit increment table. This is like a rate of change. So I think this is newtons meters per second. So the input to the table is miles per hour. So at low miles per hour, we're set up to only allow the torque increase to ramp up by 500 Newton meters per second. And as the as the vehicle speed gets higher, we're allowed for the torque request to ramp up by 1000 Newton meters per second. So if your table here is set to 100, right, and you snapped the throttle, if the driver somehow snapped the throttle instantly from 0 to 100%, it would not ramp up instantly from 0 torque to your full torque, which I will set it back to, let's set it to 500 because that's an easy number. It wouldn't instantly ramp from 0 to 500 Newton meters. It would take, at 5 miles an hour and below, it would take 1 full second for that to ramp up from 0 up to 500 Newton meters of torque. and at 8 miles an hour, it would take, I guess that's what, half a second to ramp up from 0 to 500, even if the driver somehow snapped the throttle that quickly. So if it feels like you're pressing the pedal quickly, but the motor's not getting torque increased quickly enough, and you'll see that in data logs. You'll see that instead of snapping up and going over, you'll see that the torque number would kind of ramp up instead of kind of snap up. It would be sort of a diagonal thing because of more of this rate limiting. You could think of this as like a slew rate. And then up at higher miles per hour numbers, we've got it set to allow quicker torque ramping up. There's another one for this is for torque ramping down. So motor torque request limit decelerating or decrement. So if the driver lifted the throttle instantly and the request went from 500 newton meters down to 0 newton meters, it would actually ramp down instead of snap down, and that's set by these numbers here. So if it seems like the driver lifts off and the car doesn't lift off quickly enough, you would change that in here. You could put a higher number, say 3,000, to remove torque more quickly, like a snap reduction as opposed to a ramp reduction. There are tables like this for each of the performance levels. So this table for number 2 is active in performance level 2, table 3 is active in performance level 3, table 4 active in performance level 4. And I believe that's about all we've got. There are some inverter current limits that could prevent a car from requesting full torque. Now, those won't be displayed in the torque limits, right? The inverter current is separate from the torque limits. So I think this video feels long enough. I'm going to stop this video and we'll cover inverter current in another one. So, wow, if you made it this far, thank you for watching. Appreciate your patience. I'll maybe record another one of these that's a little less rambling. Thanks.